Hey everybody, and welcome to another new episode of Time Extend. You're listening to Adam Ismail, as always. I'm joined with Brendan Rorison, and picking up on our WipEout ranking discussion from last week, we're finishing that discussion up this week. We are yet again joined by our guest, Daryl Baxter, to talk about the rest of the best games in the WipEout series. Daryl, how you doing?
I'm good, thanks, man. I'm good. I'm already I've got the names like down to a T this time, so I know which one I'm going to talk about. So it's all good. I'm ready to go, man.
Yeah. Well, you know, I think the audience got your hatred of 2048 down, very clear, regardless if you weren't sure what game you were actually referring to.
Yeah, it's good. I feel like it's therapy in a way, so I feel better for it now. It's all good.
Brendan, you also you were able to, come clean about all of your problems with that game. Are you calmer now? Do you feel like you can enter this with a clear head?
Yeah, well, after we finished up the podcast, I wrote a 12,000 word essay on why it sucks, and then I uploaded a 10-hour YouTube video of ranting, since that's what white middle-aged YouTubers are supposed to do about stuff. So got there in the end after complaining about something so unimportant.
That's good. It sounds like you did everything to a T, everything you were supposed to do. So
exactly.
So we can carry on then. So the interesting thing about the second half of this discussion is just by the nature of how we rank these games and we voted for them, we ended up with a lot of ties. So there's a tie for third place and there's a tie for first place. And without further ado, we will just talk about what the games that tied for third were. So, and it's actually very appropriate that they would tie because they're very similar. They were WipEout Pure and WipEout Pulse, which were the two PSP entries coming out in 2005 and 2007 respectively. Pure was a launch title, and Pulse improved in a lot of ways, but also would bring a lot of those improvements into WipEout HD Fury, which would come out the next year. So these are two very similar games, and to be honest, Brendan, I know you love Pulse. You voted very highly. I voted Pure very highly. They kind of blend together in my memory, but I actually didn't play Pulse when it came out. I played it only, I think, after I played HD. So how did you guys basically arrive at these games? Were you already, I guess at this point you were probably both already firmly invested in WipEout at this point. I was kind of just getting my feet wet.
Yeah, when it comes to Pure and Pulse, the interesting thing about them is, like you're saying, they try and achieve pretty much the same objective, a modern portable WipEout game, but the way they set about it was slightly different, in the sense that I felt as if Pure into the kind of design aesthetics of the games that came previously, but updating it with this fresh new visual style that looked great. But whereas with Pulse, they took that and then tried to make it a bit more edgy almost, and the atmosphere of the game felt a lot more kind of techno inspired rather than the kind of new futuristic way the game series had been previously. So like you're saying, they both rated very similarly. Gameplay is pretty much identical. But for me, the reason Pulse came out on top in terms of my individual ratings was purely because I felt as if, like you're saying, the foundations for HD Fury were there. Pulse was the kind of the coming of age game for what would be the new kind of era of WipEout.
Oh, I think that's definitely true. Daryl, what are your thoughts?
I mean, I came to WipEout Pure when I first got a PSP, so that was how I was introduced to it. And then, of course, Pulse came out, I think, 2007. And I mean, I kind of agree with Brendan when it came to Pulse. I mean, it's definitely kind of it was a point where the series matured really, almost into a sense. They kind of learned from some of the failings from Fusion and then kind of built it into these two games. And I kind of find Pulse to actually be the worst game of the two, actually, because I feel like it's kind of more, like you say, kind of more techno-inspired, more arcadey. Whereas with Pure, I kind of feel like there's more depth to it. There's less repetition, to be honest, with Pure. And I feel like the handling's slightly better as well. It kind of rivals WipEout 3. I almost have seen this WipEout Pure as kind of like a WipEout 3.5, to be honest. Really.
Yeah.
And I think with Pulse, even though we kind of tried to enhance some of the mechanics and the steering, I think, unfortunately, it kind of came worse off. I mean, even like I was playing both of them a few days ago, I even felt like the UI and the menus of Pulse was worse. You had this kind of like vertical selection of the stages and things, and you didn't really know where to go. Whereas a Pure, it was just all kind of, it was there for you to go for and select and really easy to do. And yeah, I mean, I think with Pure, especially when you got like the download packs back in the day, because this was a new thing, you know, you could download tracks, which is insane. I felt like Pure kind of won out, and that's really the game out of the two that I kind of go back to more.
Yeah, Pure was definitely ahead of its time. I mean, the ability to download extra content, and I think some of it was free and some of it was paid, but back then, 2005, you know, everything was very cheap. So it very much was a game ahead of its time, and Pure was a great showcase of what the PSP could do, although Pure was, you know, I mean, at that time, handheld gaming before the PSP came out was like, it was a Game Boy Advance, you know, it was something that was barely as powerful as an SNES. And now we're getting to a point where you can have console quality games, you know, on the go, which was a really big deal. So I remember the first time I played Pure, and Pure was, as I said last podcast, was the first WipEout game I ever played. So I kind of went into the series not knowing what to expect, and I was just blown away. I mean, I think last show, Brendan, I think you were the one who said, like, you always remember the first laps you take on, like, the first track in, like, a racing game that's very important. And, like, for me, Veneta K is, like, such a perfect track. I love it. It's it's just like that image of that track, and it's burned into my memory almost like Seaside Route 765 was when I played Ridge Racers on the PSP for the first time. And it's just, it does feel like a continuation of WipEout 3, Daryl. I think that's absolutely correct, and I think that's probably why I love it so much. I mean, I gave it, like, my second highest rating of the series, and it carries, even though at this point, you know, Studio Liverpool hadn't been working with the Designers Republic for a couple years now. It still feels like it carries some sort of TDR influence. It's very clean, it's very basic, it's very but effective and beautiful, and the aesthetically is designed in such a way that it works to the PSP's strengths. You know, it's not trying to throw too much at you at any given time. It's just very clean and beautiful and futuristic in the way that I, you know, the kind of future that I appreciate and that I love to see in WipEout.
And I think that sums up something pretty interesting about this series, where it does have quite a large dedicated group of fans, but like the games have distinctly different styles. And the thing about Pure was, like you're saying, it is very similar to 3 in terms of the handling, that more kind of bobbly or floaty model that you'd expect from anti-gravity racers. Pulse onwards, it became very exact, almost mathematical in nature, and I can see why a lot of older WipEout fans wouldn't like that. The focus became on the barrel rolls, it became about using the air brakes. Because once you get really good at WipEout in the later games like HD Fury and stuff, it's all about double tapping each of those air brakes. If you're actually using them the normal method that you're so used to in the previous games, you're losing a lot of time there because they kind of fundamentally change how the ships handle. I got like proper into learning the Pulse way of playing, but even now, the original WipEout games, I'm not very fast in them at all, because whilst I enjoy them, I just never fully got on with the floaty modelling in terms of trying to become great at the games, and it never bothered me because the games are so great anyway that isn't the point. But when Pulse came out, this is the competitive WipEout experience I feel as if has been missing. And the thing about Pulse was as well, we were saying like how Pure did great from an aesthetics point of view. You can see Studio Liverpool really did learn from TDR. It looked fantastic. But on a technical level, I feel as if Pulse also achieved some great things. You had custom soundtracks in there. You could load MP3s onto the memory stick and use your own soundtrack, which was really cool. There was a pretty in-depth photo mode that had been improved from Pure. The daddy of them all, as far as I was concerned, was you could upload libraries online through your PC and load them into the game, so you could have custom designed the ships. And that's something we never seen ever again in WipEout, but it was so cool at the time, especially on a portable device.
Yeah, it makes me wish I had played this game when it actually came out, because all of those things, you know, the liveries and stuff like that would have been really kind of in their heyday. And It is. I feel like it's quite brave of them to allow people to do that, because I mean, like, so many other racing franchises have a hard time giving some control back to the players, and WipEout is so based around its aesthetic and this cohesive visual design that to relinquish a little bit of that control seems like almost like a recipe for disaster. Like, I can only imagine, I don't know how sophisticated livery ever was, but I can only imagine you're driving around and then all of a sudden you see, like, Monster Energy on the side of an AG ship, or like, the guy from Gears of War or whatever. Like, yeah.
I mean, that's the thing about the livery editor. Basically, the way it worked was like Approach back then for PC sims and the like, where you had like a spread, like a design sheet of each side of the ship and how the decal would work, and then on your PC you could use Photoshop or whatever to overlay it. But the cool thing was that because it's the exact dimensions of the ships, they'd actually included by default the regular paint job that the designers would make on their own development kit. So you could actually change the colours of the ships. So for example, one of the things I did, because like I love WipEout's lore and stuff, was to have one of the Pfizer ships in a slightly different livery. So it was like if that was another pilot. So when you're racing and stuff, you could make like a black and gold version of the Pfizer livery. It would look the exact same.
Oh, that's really cool.
As the blue and yellow one. The only difference would be that you were able to make that change. And like you're saying, obviously, that it goes against the design philosophy of WipEout because you can make what you want. But I feel as if designers would understand and appreciate in terms of how the kind of design kit worked. It was a great idea at the time, and if I recall correctly, when you raced online, people couldn't see your custom designs anyway. So it was kind of for your benefit only. But I mean, I will be honest, it's easy to mess with WipEout's design philosophy. So whilst I did create my own designs, it was hard to get away from the ones that are provided, because they fit the world so well.
Did either of you play the PS2 port of WipEout Pulse by chance? Because I completely forgot that this game was ported to the PS2.
Nope.
God, I did as well. No, I forgot. Yeah. No, I didn't.
Yeah. It was part of that like late PS2 lifespan push that Sony made to port like Motorstorm Arctic Edge and this game and some other games to the PS2 from
Liberty
the PSP.
Stories.
Yeah.
Liberty City Stories, I remember, yeah.
Yep, Liberty City Stories. Yeah, it was, I mean, it was smart. It was just kind of weird because, like, in this case, it came to the PS2 like 2 years later. And I think maybe it was the type of thing where, I don't know, they wanted people to get into HD on the PS3 first, and they wanted to give them that experience, and then everyone who languished behind and didn't have a PS3 yet, here, we'll toss you a port of Pulse, which, I mean, is nice. I mean, it's way better than Fusion, I think we can all agree, and, is the PS2 had some, had relatively long legs for a console, I mean, it couldn't do all of the network functionality a PS3 could, but towards the end of the PS2's lifespan, you were seeing some amazing looking games, and like, even Gran Turismo 4 is still really beautiful for its time. So I get it. I just wonder how many people experience the game this way.
It's a good point. I've never played it myself. I would have loved to have tried it, but I can't even remember seeing it in any shops. That way?
I don't either.
By the time it came out, it was the PS2 sections in stores were just fading away as well, so the likelihood of finding it, I'd say it was pretty low over here, because I can't remember seeing it whatsoever. I know it existed, but never seen it in the flesh.
Yeah, I knew it existed, but it wasn't released in the US, which I'm not surprised by at all, but it might actually be pretty rare. Who knows?
Yeah, could be.
It is. I've just been looking on eBay, and there's a copy of WipEout Pulse for £80 on the PS2.
Wow.
Jesus.
Yeah. Very rare. Very rare.
Yeah.
These collectors, then.
I mean, let's be honest. If you have a PSP or you still have one, I mean, that's probably the best way to play a game, just because you can take it anywhere, and if you want that home console WipEout experience, there's nothing better than HD at this point. Or I guess Omega Collection, but.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, so I think that just about covers those two games. I mean, I feel like this is where Studio Liverpool like really put its stamp on the PSP and opened WipEout to a whole new fan base, which was great for them to do that, because it made the next game on our list, which is Wipeout HD, arrive at this time where I feel like everyone was more aware of the series. I mean, we talked last episode about the fact that Wipeout had this obviously like this huge UK presence and this huge European presence, but I felt like at least in North America and my neck of the woods, like a lot more people started to become aware of Wipeout on the PS3 with HD, especially because it released all around the world at the same time. It was a PlayStation Network title, which was very strange at the time because like that was back during those days when like you looked at like Xbox Live Arcade games and PlayStation Network games as like lesser. So the idea that this was going to be like, I remember struggling with the concept that like, wait, this is like a fully fledged Wipeout. Like it also had the HD suffix. It wasn't like Wipeout, I don't know what you'd call it, 4 or something like that. So it wasn't quite sure where this landed in like kind of the pecking order of the series. But I mean, this game defined Wipeout for a number of years and was supported for a long time. I mean, I can't remember if Fury came out in like 2009 or 2010, but it felt like this game went on forever and ever.
Yeah, definitely. And it's good you brought up the point about it being like a digital exclusive for quite some amount of time. Eventually it did get a hard copy release.
Right.
They did say basically, like Studio Liverpool, that the idea was to prove at that time that downloadable content and downloadable games didn't have to be small in scale. And whilst it's norm now that everything gets released digitally, sometimes that's your only option in certain platforms. I remember being the same as you, Adam. I was like, is this a full game or is it a DLC basically for Pulse with a few added bells and whistles? And yeah, it was just so well supported throughout its whole life cycle. By the time Fury came around, precedented for such an amazing amount of content to be added to a game that had been out for such a long time. And that meant that it did have a consistent player base for quite some time. The online worked really well, all things considered. What looked as if it could have been just a taster like Gran Turismo HD.
Don't bring up GTHD.
I just felt as if it was a good example to show how confused the name could make people, because Wipeout HD might have implied it was some sort of tech demo, but in reality, like, this was a full-fledged game and over 500 hours of gameplay in this game, and I loved every single minute of it. This is pretty much my definitive Wipeout experience in terms of raw amount of hours spent playing.
Yeah, I think it's a lot of people's definitive Wipeout experience. Daryl, how did you get on with it?
I mean, I remember like when HD first came out, and you're both right. I mean, I kind of saw it as like one of those kind of trial versions that you'd maybe see now and again in the PS3 era, the way you just kind of like download a few levels and then just kind of wait for what could be coming next. But it was Fury actually that kind of really got me into it, because there was a mode in it, I think it was Detonator, where instead of like increasing the speed, not doing zones, it was laps instead. So we just get faster like every single time, up to 14 laps, and I was addicted to that mode. I mean, that was just so much fun. And that was kind of the mode like that kind of made me like got the definitive mode, definitive game of Wipeout really on the PS3 and PS4 as well, really in time. It just made it really fun, and it made it like the ultimate edition of what Wipeout could be and how it could be in the future. And it was just really fun. I mean, to me, it is like, there's not a lot that can be explained about it, because it to me just seems like the ultimate edition, like kind of almost like a greatest hits collection of Wipeout, and put into an upscaled HD version of Wipeout HD and Fury with 3 extra modes. I'm just seeing it now, not just Detonator, but you got Zone Battle, where you can race other ones, an Eliminator, which reminded me of Burnout 3 for some reason, but here we are. And you know, and it's just a great thing. It was fantastic. And I remember like around those years as well, like trophies were a big deal of like what games are going to be updated with trophy support.
Yeah,
I think Metal Gear Solid 4 and Wipeout were the two big ones that people were waiting for. And I think they finally got it in 2009, early 2010. I think that was a big deal. So I think Wipeout kind of really came into its own when the trophy update came in as well. So yeah, big fan of it.
Yeah, Detonator and Eliminator, I remember being kind of on the fence about those before I started actually playing those modes and playing the game. Because I think Eliminator, I think HE didn't come out with it, but Fury introduced the more combat-heavy modes. And I remember thinking, like, they're trying to make Wipeout into something it isn't. Like, Wipeout's not about combat. But then the second that you understand, that you actually play it and you understand kind of how the modes work, it clicks. It's like, this is something I never knew I wanted. Like, Eliminator's kind of weird because, like, there's all this commotion, all this stuff happening, and it almost feels like it's by chance that, like, complete random chaos that, like, one of your AI competitors would all of a sudden do really well and you wouldn't. Like, it almost feels unfair, but at the same time, it's just, like, you're just immersed in all of this, just, like, all these explosions and just people, like, being able to switch back and forth. Like, you can do a 180 just by pressing a button in those modes, which is, like, it totally changes the game, and all of a sudden it doesn't really matter that you're on, like, a linear racetrack. It could be like a Mario Party or a Mario Kart battle stage for all you know, and it's like it totally transforms kind of what you expect from Wipeout, but does so in a way that is a lot of fun. And as skeptical as I was of those modes before I started playing them, I definitely fell in love with them later on. Yeah, and it just, HD Fury brought everything together that had been created up until that point into Wipeout. And I kind of just remembered as well, there was like a mini controversy in the game when they used to play adverts during the loading screens. Don't know if you guys remember that. There was like something where it would play random adverts, but the adverts weren't timed to the length of loading times. So it could be a 30-second ad, but usually only a 15-second load time. And you'd have to wait till the full advert finished, and fans were quite pissed off about it. There were a couple controversies with this game. That was one, and then before it came out, it was actually delayed because of concerns relating to zone mode and epilepsy, like being an epilepsy trigger. Because in that mode, you know, as I'm sure a lot of people listening know, you're kind of hit with this barrage of just like pulsating visuals, and the entire track and everything changes colors and changes intensity based on the music, based on the level that you're racing at, you know, because you go faster and faster in zone mode. And if you dig back, you can actually see some articles about it and people from the development team going like, yeah, we had to kind of mess about with it and do so in a way that toned it down, but it's still pretty beautiful. And I mean, I haven't seen what the original zone mode looked like, because I don't know if that footage even exists online. It might in like preview form, but zone mode in this game regardless looks great. And it's just, you know, of course Wipeout would run into that particular issue. You know, I can't imagine any other series. You know, it's the same thing that happened with that, like, that episode of Pokemon in Japan, like in the 90s. You know, it's like, it's so weird, but, you know, of course Wipeout would fall into that. Presentation of the game really is on another level. Like, we talked about previous games, specifically what Fusion in 2048 might have failed at, in the sense that this game just looks so crisp from every angle when you're on the track or in the menus. Everything's so distinct and clear. P60 frames per second, which just illustrates that further. I was going to say, Brendan, you haven't said the 4 magic words yet. 60 frames per second. We got there eventually. Yeah. But, yeah, I mean, that leads on to one of the reasons I consider this the definitive experience, because it's just, it doesn't matter how fast the game is. Everything's so clear that you can never blame, like, you can't blame any form of blindness in terms of how the game portrays its track and the ships. You can see everything very distinctively. The gameplay is pretty much at its peak here for me. I just feel as if it's the most responsive Wipeout game and the most impressive for that reason. Yeah, definitely the most responsive. And also, this was a time when most games on PS3 and 360... I don't even know if the 360 could do 1080p, but the PS3 could, but a lot of games didn't take advantage of it. They would run 720p mode. So this was one of the first that actually took advantage of the full possible display resolution of the PS3, which made it look incredibly crisp. And it was that kind of Studio Liverpool aesthetic at this time where, like, the textures aren't super detailed, and, like, nothing's like jaw-dropping, and, like, you know, it's a different... Visually, it feels differently than like an Uncharted or like another like high-end AAA Sony developed PS3 game, but they throw a lot of, for lack of a better word, polygons at you. There's so much, like, you can see crowds, you can see like billboards floating in the sky, you can see like balloons and confetti and fireworks, and like there's just a lot of visual noise happening, which sounds kind of disparaging, but like it's actually like breathtaking when you first play the game. And going back to 2048, that stuff doesn't work so great on the smaller screen, but you know, on the big TV in 2008 on an HDTV, and you've never seen anything like this before, like it really is breathtaking, and it does feel like WipEout kind of it kind of tipped over. There was this like new era, and it was taking advantage of the hardware in a way that a lot of our games didn't. So it felt fresh and new. You know, we didn't know at the time that would be kind of the swan song of the series in a weird way, but
Fury, just like when they introduced Fury, they kept the same principles but applied it in a completely different way. So there was a lot more darker kind of maps introduced. The menu took on a more edgy black and red theme, in the ships as well. The new ship designs were a lot more aggressive and sharp edges compared to what we'd seen previously.
Yeah. I think of it as like I think of it as like the Prince of Persia Warrior Within to HD's Sands of Time. If that's a reference that anyone understands.
No, I get exactly what you mean.
Or like the Metroid Prime, like wasn't the second Metroid Prime game like really emo all of a sudden? Like there was a Dark Samus.
Echoes.
Yeah, Echoes, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely following in the footsteps of those other franchises, for sure. Yeah, so I have very fond memories of these two games, and I mean this one game that had a pretty sizable expansion. It's interesting looking into history of it a little bit, just the fact that it kind of like it seemed like Sony was not planning on releasing a WipEout game for a PS3, and this actually came about. The whole birth of the HD project came about by way of a tech demo. I was reading that somebody from the studio Liverpool team kind of just wanted to use the PS3 hardware to test, like, oh, how could we achieve motion blur and camera shake and some other visual effects, and they ported like Pulse to the system. And then eventually the project ended up looking so good when they realized they could take advantage of the PS3's, you know, vast hardware, that it kind of became this real thing, and they presented to Sony, and Sony was like, yeah, let's do it. So, which is almost like, I mean, it's cool that something can come about that way, but at the same time, it's almost like disappointing, and I feel like almost insulting to WipEout that like it kind of backdoor became this thing on the PS3, and then maybe Sony was like, we'll launch it as like a digital game, not like a fully boxed product when it comes out, because like we don't totally believe in it, but like, hey, we got the PlayStation Network, maybe we could use that. So WipEout kind of exists in this weird like, does anyone in Sony like really appreciate it or not? Like it's hard to tell, and I mean I'm glad this game came out, but I do wonder if it had a little bit more muscle behind it, you know, would we have gotten a true sequel? Would we have gotten, you know, something that wasn't more like a greatest hits of previous entries in the franchise and was more its own thing? Yeah,
and it is a bit of a surprise, because Sony especially were always so intent on making sure that their AAA franchises had a lot of involvement from the studio, maintaining that quality, but WipEout HD Fury, if we want to look at it in its most basic form, up-res of a lot of existing content, but the amount of effort Studio Liverpool put in was probably a lot more than Sony expected, so when they seen that build, they had no choice but to greenlight it.
Yeah, I think that there was a certain momentum behind it, and once the game came out, and you know, I was playing it, and a couple of my friends were playing it who like had no previous exposure to WipEout, like, and people who were like more into sim racing too, because WipEout's like this weird thing where, you know, I feel like if we're comparing AG series, like F-Zero is there's no basis for F-Zero in like actual physics or reality. Like it's a fun game to play, but there's no weightiness to the ships. It doesn't feel real at all. Whereas like WipEout's always existed in this weird place where it's almost like they were trying to make a futuristic racing game 100 years in the future, but do it in the most realistic way possible by guessing at what that would feel like, and like HD because it's 60 frames per second, because it's obviously the most like technically adept of all of the games in the series, like I feel like it approaches that the most. Like it feels as real as it can. So like you could go from playing a sim racing game to this. Like I feel like if you aren't familiar with arcade racers, or you aren't familiar with anything like Wipeout and the style of AG racing, like but you like something that's more realistic, like Wipeout is a game that you could just have fun hot lapping in and learning, and like it feels as technically sound as a Gran Turismo or as a Forza or something like that, even though it's something that's totally unique and not possible in reality. And HD Fury, I think, was where I realized that. I mean, I had a friend who loved just hot lapping in like GT5 Prologue and stuff like that, and that was all he do. And he was into iRacing as well. And I was surprised when all of a sudden he was just like spending hours hot lapping Ubermall, because that was like his favorite track. So Wipeout definitely has that appeal.
It does, and that's what I was going to ask then, because I'm not surprised to hear your friend had a specific track that he loved in HD Fury, and I was the same. For me, it was Moa Firma, and I used to do so many laps of that track. What about you guys? Is there a Fury you spent a lot of time on?
To be honest, what's it called? The Amphitheon? That's a good one. That's a good track, I remember. I think that was the, one was like I think it's like the water. Was it the water one? Because it's yeah, I'm sure it is. Or no, it's not. No, it is almost like it said it's based in Las Vegas. Really nice, just colourful, fantastic. Yeah. Just kind of, again, it's almost like a throwback to the first couple of Wipeouts, really, and just in a HD, vibe. And I think it really kind of refined it from when it appeared in Pulse as well. So yeah, that's definitely a track I'd come back to.
Yeah, here's the issue I have with Wipeout, and some of the Time Extend listeners who are big Wipeout fans are probably going to, I don't know, be aghast at this, but like I have a really hard time remembering names with this series because they're all just made up words. I know that's really strange, but like it's just very difficult for me, and they're all like Ultima 7 was like the first track in the first game, but it's like, why couldn't you have just called it Ultima, like by putting the 7 on? Like I don't know if there's an Ultima 4 or something like this. My brain struggles with these things, but the one I remember that I loved was Changhao Project. That that is, but just because of like the way it winds you up in the beginning, and then you have those you have that really long kind of like left-hander that's like also kind of cantilevered, like the banking is like away, I think, from the middle from the inside of the corner, which kind of complicates things. Before that, you have a couple jumps. It's a very like vertical track, because once you go around that corner, there are no walls, and then you have a similar like right-hander, like relaxed right-hander bend, and then you have that huge drop where you could do. I mean, that's where I learned that like, oh, I can do barrel rolls and things in Wipeout. It's like it just. The verticality of that track was what stuck with me, and why I really enjoyed it. And you could, anytime you're in the air in Wipeout, it's like sometimes you can take advantage of that with the barrel roll, and it's all about the landing and stuff. So it just totally changes the dynamic for me, and I really love that track.
Yeah, and that is a great example for bringing in the verticality argument to the game in totality, because once you learn that if you like control the pitch of your ship enough so you can get the slight amount of air needed to complete barrel rolls, that's when like all bets are off, and you can set insane lap times, and you can really learn what lies underneath the game in terms of from a competitive side of things. And learning the slight amount of bumps we could do barrel rolls, like there was always the trophy for Moa Firma where it was like, do a barrel roll on that. And when you first play the game, you're like, where the hell am I supposed to do a barrel roll on Moa Firma? And then it becomes so obvious when you see it, you're like, okay, that makes sense. And then you find out that there's another place you can do a barrel roll on Moa Firma. If you edge the ship correctly pitch-wise and then hit a boost, you can like fly corners rather than take it. And the whole game is full of those little shortcuts, but one of the things that Wipeout does well that annoys me about kart racers and other anti-gravity racers is like the track limits are very confined. Usually if you go off the track and Wipeout, it just plumps you back on the track right away. No time wasted. Fury, there are certain parts that you can exploit the track limits, so you can just take a little shortcut through using a boost or timing a barrel roll. And that's what the game does so well, because I like to think, like the creators are obviously going for, part of the Wipeout kind of timeline, that this is as close to Formula 1 probably as Wipeout gets, in the sense that all the tracks are kind of fairly short, and like there's no deviation, it's one track, and there's no real shortcuts and stuff. Like 2048, by comparison, has many different routes, whereas in HD Fury, aside from one or two tracks, it's all very much take, and there's no deviation. But the more you learn the game, the more you learn how the ships handle, you can start to discover where the time lies in terms of getting good barrel rolls. So, example, on Ubermall, through the tiny split track onto the ramp, you can get one barrel roll easily enough because you're in the air. But if you manage to hit the correct part of where you land, you can do another barrel roll. And learning how to master that type of stuff, that's where the game really shone for me, because I used to be pretty invested in the kind of the community events side of things. Just mind-blowing to watch them work, because they were able to find these barrel roll opportunities in places that you would have never guessed existed.
Yeah, and I have to imagine that, I don't know if it was Pulse or HD that introduced this, but kind of like the magnetic strips on certain tracks. So like at the back end of Moa Therma, where you have all these bumps, but if I remember correctly, the magnetic strip runs the whole time, so you can't actually get any air. That was always a little bit annoying to me, because it's like those are parts of tracks I want to take advantage of with barrel rolls. But so when they would use it a bit too often, it was kind of frustrating, but it also allowed you to have some crazy tracks, like, in the beginning of Moa Therma, where you have that huge loop. So I could see the reason for it, but it is interesting. Like, I never, as much as I loved WipEout HD and as much as I played it, I feel like I never got into the finding the secrets of every track as much, because a lot of it, like, maybe not this game so much, but definitely 2048, which I think, Brendan, you said that really didn't interest you. Like, to a certain point, a lot of it's just like, make sure you hit every single boost pad, and I'm just like, and I know you said you're not really interested in boost pad gameplay. Like, it doesn't do anything for me either. But then having all the little secrets and things you can exploit, I feel like gives the game legs and makes it a little bit less obvious how you have to be fast, which is always good for competitive play and finding secrets and sharing and community and all the great things that come with that.
Yeah, for sure. And Daryl, your experience of HD Fury then, was it pretty much just offline? Were you big on the single player stuff, or did you play some online as well?
A little bit of online, but I'll be honest, I mean, I'm not really a massive online player, to be honest. I like just sitting next to someone and just playing the game, whether it's in split screen or 4-player. But I do play like a lot of the single player. I did and I still do with it, and it's just a really fun time of just kind of completing the tracks. And like you say, there's not a lot of kind of secrets in these tracks. It's a lot of fun, definitely in this upscaled way. And I have to say as well, like, when this was ported to the Omega Collection, I mean, playing it in VR was just incredible, really. I mean, that was just another experience with WipEout. It makes you want just a game that has a lot of VR tracks that you can just play on as well.
Yeah, we didn't really touch on that because I haven't played it in VR. But there were some people who responded on Twitter saying that, like, nothing beats Omega Collection in VR, which I'm actually surprised to hear, because, like, if you want to talk about motion sickness, I have to imagine that WipEout would be like the game that would give you the most motion sickness in VR if you're susceptible to it.
Yeah, it did to me a little bit at the beginning. And I remember when I first tried the VR, playing Resident Evil 7, and my God, just getting the motion sickness from that was insane. But for some reason in WipEout, I mean, it does it in a way where it's manageable. And it's just the fact that you're just looking around the craft as you're racing and, like, using the weapons, and it's a crazy experience. And you just kind of think, really, like, just how far we've come from, like, playing, like, the first WipEout on PlayStation 1, Sega Saturn, to just playing it in a headset in VR. I mean, it's crazy. Absolutely crazy.
Given the the feedback that, it seems like a lot of people do enjoy playing Omega Collection in VR. It does make me hope and wish that the series somehow returns, because it seems like we've reached this point where there's like this whole new way we could experience a series, and just in time for that to arrive, Wipeout is functionally dead.
Yeah, exactly, and that's a really good point, to be honest, because I'm not sure what developer could do the series justice as well, because Wipeout just has that like distinct feel to it. It's very hard to replicate, as we've seen. Just not quite getting on its level.
Yeah. Well, we've talked about Fury in HD for a while now, and at this point we should probably move on to the top 2 games, if that's all right with everyone.
Yep.
Although I know HD is very near and dear to your heart, Brendan, so you could probably fill an entire show just talking about this game.
I can talk about HD, how much I love it, nearly as much as I hate 2048. If that isn't a resounding recommendation, what is?
So as you probably guessed by now, the tie for first place is between Wipeout 2097 and Wipeout 3. And it kind of bothers me at this end in a tie, because I feel like it's pretty anticlimactic. These are 2 very highly regarded games, and I see as many people prefer 3 as I do 2097. Like, I feel like it's not like Ridge Racer where it's like clearly everyone favors Type 4. Wipeout is like, you're either a 29. If you're interested in the classic games, you either prefer 2097 or 3. I mean, like, you can love them both, and I do, and I think we all do. But like, I think it all comes down to like, there's just like the aesthetic is so different. The physics are different to a certain extent. Both great games, but like almost different flavors of that experience.
Yeah, I think you're correct there, and I don't think there's an objective answer for what game is better, personally. I think 2097 is so focused and exact that it does perfectly what it sets out to do. But Wipeout 3 of Wipeout to what we'd like to see it become. So it just depends whether you want this like focused experience that, let's be honest, 2097 nails, because I always think about this game a lot. One that arguably plays the best and has the most content, and that would be the 3 would be the winner in that regard.
Yeah, let's talk about 2097 first. And Daryl, you gave it, I think, your highest rating out of all the games, and yeah, why was that?
I don't know whether it's like for nostalgic value, because I remember when I first got my PlayStation, I mean, everyone kind of had that demo disc that was packaged with it, and one of the games was 2097, and it came with a track that I always highly regard. It's called, if I'm going to pronounce it wrong probably, but Guerre d'Europe. It's like set in a disused metro system in France. And
yes.
Yeah, I loved it. Absolutely loved it. And I think it's just a mix of the UI of it, the handling of the ships, the way you go through the menus, and every time you just kind of have a weird satisfaction every time you select something. It's like bang every time. And like almost like a sliding door, and it closes in, bam! I just like it. I've got a weird thing about that. But it's like, just when you go in for every single track is different. They're not bland. They're not kind of samey. You've got everything there, and every time you kind of use a weapon as well, it's got that kind of just right feel of just that satisfaction when you hit something. And I think especially when it comes to the plasma weapon as well. I mean, you hear it charge up, you hear it just fire, and as soon as it hits that ship, I mean, it's just like the ultimate, like, yeah, I've got this now. I mean, this is good. And of course, I mean, like the music, like Chemical Brothers, and I think like one of you like had tweeted like the soundtrack and that was on Spotify, and I spent like the last week just listening to it again and reminiscing.
Yeah.
You know, it was fantastic, and I just everything about it, I just love it. And even when like you unlock the piranha ships as well, I mean, that's just insane. And yeah, I just love it. It's just everything about it is just. Everything is great. The weapons, like how they display in the hood, I mean, you just kind of get the feeling of like what it means and what it is. And like the electric one, the missiles, the speed, the speed boost as well. I mean, you just, on like Europa track, if you press it just before you go off that bridge, my God, you can just fly in like the DeLorean Back to the Future. It's crazy. It's so fast. It's amazing. And yeah, I just love it as well. The only thing that lacked it was the like a split screen, which came in WipEout 3, but I'm willing to put that aside just because of how good the game is, because it's always a game. As soon as I think of WipEout, it's that game that I think of straight away, and I just want to see it remastered in some way. Even though some tracks got remastered in WipEout 3, but that's beside the point. I just want to see a WipEout 397 remake. So yeah, that's all from me.
I mean, I completely agree with that. I mean, this game it's basically perfect. Like, I have, like, no complaints about this. It did have that early PS1 problem of not having split screen, but then a lot of games back then didn't have split screen. Ridge Racer didn't have split screen. Rage Racer didn't have split screen. So, like, I get it. But, yeah, I mean, what can you say about it? This was a game that I revisited the most in anticipation of this podcast. I think... after we had our first show, I played this game for probably like 3 hours from start to I got through like the first challenge, which is the first championship in the game. It's so interesting the way the single player experience is laid out, because you basically go through the arcade mode once with all the ships, get gold, or not with all ships, but like once the different tracks, and each one is a different speed class. So you go through them one by one, you gold them. And then there's a challenge, and the challenge is like, challenge one's like a 6-race championship, which at first, well, it's not a championship. The interesting thing about it is like, I start playing it, and I'm like, oh fuck, they give you like 3 continues, and you have to get first in every single one. But if you get a podium, you get a free continue. So I spent, God, I don't know which track it was. I think it was the second to last one in the fastest class that was available at the time. I'll find the name of it. But I had such a hard time golding this one track. I spent probably 45 minutes on that one track alone. But then, like, when I got through the entire series and got first in every single race, it was just I feel like I earned it. And the thing about this game that I feel like is very different from a lot of other racing games from this time period is that it doesn't feel unfair. Like, you feel like you earn the victories, and like the difficulty ramps up in a very understandable, reasonable way, where it's like the first handful races you do are very easy, and then you can see things before your eyes start to change, and you know what you need to do. 3 actually is probably like, I have a bigger problem with it in 3, because 3 ramps up the difficulty way too quickly, whereas 2097 I feel like you get your feet wet, and then all of a sudden it's like, okay, I understand, like I've kind of grown with the game at this point in terms of my abilities, and it's just like such a satisfying experience. Like, I love the physics. I think the physics of 2097 are probably my favorite, because I do prefer the floatier, the bouncy, floaty, slide up against the walls kind of gameplay that these earlier ones have.
Right.
And they focused and fixed a lot of things. I mean, this game only came out 1 year after the original, and they weren't necessarily intending for it to be a sequel, which is why they called it 2097, which I never really picked up on, instead of like a WipEout 2. Although obviously WipEout 3 will be 3, so I guess this was really WipEout 2. But at any rate, they completely rewrote the code for a collision so that, when you hit the track edges, you wouldn't necessarily stop immediately. The AI was rebalanced. The ships, they gave energy bars so you could eliminate other combatants as well as yourself be eliminated. And they introduced ghost vehicles, but apparently only in the UK because Atari had a copyright or a trademark on that feature in the rest of the world, which I just discovered in doing research for a show. So that's pretty interesting. A lot of small changes that built up to a big improvement.
Yeah, for sure. And that ghost steamship thing is very weird because I was also reading the reason it was called XL in the US was because the team didn't think that the US market would understand the name.
Okay,
it's really weird.
Yeah, here's the thing. So I read that and I thought that's really silly until I realized, wait, I never understood that. Although that 2097 was 100 years in the future. Although, granted, I didn't play the game in 1997, so I wouldn't have thought. I played the game in 2009 or 2010 or something, so it didn't click with me. But yeah, that is pretty funny. I mean, XL is I think it's a fine other name. The biggest problem with XL is that when they change the name for the US and they change the box art, they change the logo. The Designers Republic. Because the 2097 box art, just like the original WipEout's cover art, is so perfect and beautiful, and I wouldn't change a single thing about it. If you've ever seen the US box art, it's got this less impressive looking logo. It doesn't really feel like WipEout. It feels like this WipEout knockoff, and you have these CGI rendered ships instead of the beautiful single blocks of color that you get in the TDR cover, and it's not the same thing, but that happens with a lot of US box art, so it's hardly surprising.
It looks like I don't know if this makes any sense, but a Nintendo 64 box art.
Yes, which WipEout 64 had the same sort of design to it as well. So
yeah, that kind of, I mean, that shows the fine margins that makes WipEout special. Changing the box art suddenly makes the game look a lot less cool.
Yeah. The inside, I mean, when you're playing the game, though, it's all the same, I mean, actually, it's funny that the difference in the logos and the name kind of does extend into the game. So, in that main menu, as you were describing, Daryl, with it's really loud, you press on something and you hear this door slamming or something like that, and the whole screen shakes. They do replace that logo with the crappier WipEout XL logo, and they do some other things. But I mean, it's got the same soundtrack, it's got the same everything, it's got the same TDR visual design. It's exactly the same game where it should be. Interestingly, this one also got a Saturn port. But the Saturn port only came out in the Europe, and unfortunately, if WipEout 1 Saturn port was slow and bad, this one's borderline unplayable. Because I've seen YouTube footage of it, and it's just the frame rate is awful, and they couldn't do a lot of the same effects transparencies and stuff like that weren't possible. So I'm amazed this game got a Saturn port at all, because by the time that it came out, I imagine the Saturn probably was dead. But and again, just like we said last show, who experienced, I want to talk to a person that first played WipEout on the Saturn, because that's gotta be so weird. And they're still a fan, yeah.
It's so strange, about how the design of the series is where its heart is, and we already kind of discussed 2097 in one of the entries at the top of our list, or the back of the list, sorry. So
yeah.
We discussed last time around was the Red Bull partnership, and I actually read through research that basically there was a nightclub tour, which was a collaboration between Red Bull and WipEout that took place round about the release of the game, and that is just the coolest thing.
Yes. So on brand. Could not be more on brand.
Exactly. And oh man, I just wish that I had. If you could be at one of those events, it would have been really cool at the time, because you would have been why is a video game hosting a nightclub tour in the UK?
I wonder what I don't know much about the the nightclub culture anywhere, let alone the UK in the late 90s. But like, I wonder what that was kind of seen as, is just like Sony is making a video game with all of the acts we love, and the Designers Republic, is in that world, and they're with it too. Like, did people accept it because it had the involvement of so many artists that they enjoyed, or did they initially like reject it because they're like, oh, this is just like a major corporation just profiting and commodifying like our world or our lifestyle or something like that? Like, that's something I wonder about.
You've got to think it was the latter initially, like,
yeah,
until people actually had the chance to play the game and realise that they had nailed the style so much.
Yeah,
I think it would have been to kind of regress from what Sony were trying to achieve, but like you're saying, all the major players were involved, so it is no surprise that 2097 or XL is so iconic, because it just, if they were going for, I don't think another video game has ever hit it so perfectly in the way that 2097 does. There's ones that come incredibly close, specifically some Gran Turismo games and the style that tries to inject into the series, and almost feels like more than a game, as cliched as that sounds. It just feels like a passion project that was bankrolled by one of the biggest video game players at the time.
I mean, to me, like, the era of WipEout 2097 and 3, and the fact that Type 4 came out at like the exact same time as WipEout 3, there's like a kinship there. Like, the only game I would argue that nails its style and is a little bit more cohesive is Ridge Racer Type 4. And like, but I mean, it's marginal. Like, these studios, as I said to Andrew in an episode way back, I think when we had him on for his Ridge Racer album, and you weren't there, Brendan, but I said something like, there must have been just like something in the water, that like, whether you were in Japan or you were Pygnosis in the UK or you're anywhere, like this, there was this like hopeful, and then we speculate it's like pre 9/11, but just like this hopeful future and like this beautiful, clean, utopian future that like never existed again, and just like hitting at this like incredibly high artistic level. And I guess it's no surprise that these games all came out within like 2 years of each other, pretty much. The one thing I do want to talk about, because we have criminally underrepresented WipEout's soundtracks during this series of podcasts, although I think that most people would agree that like the 2097 3 era was probably like the best that the series ever sounded. I mean, like, HD and stuff, like, they had good soundtracks, but like when you think about like Firestarter, when you think about Future Sound of London, when you think about like the era of music that this game was born out of, the 2097 soundtrack is iconic. Interestingly, in certain, I think for the Saturn version, they reused Tim Wright Cold Storage for 2097. I guess those licenses, maybe they only belong to Sony for the licensed soundtrack, so the PlayStation one got all of these amazing acts like Chemical Brothers and, as I said, Future Sound of London and whatnot, and the Saturn one didn't. But I mean, Tim Wright, a lot of fans still love Tim Wright and love Cold Storage, so it's good that he still was able to contribute to the series.
Yeah, for sure, and you've pretty much summed up kind of what we can say about 2097, because it is very much a game that many people that praise it, and for good reason. It is the Ridge Racer Type 4 of anti-gravity racers.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'd argue that 3 is, but it's probably a good time to talk about 3, so, because we've talked about 2097 for so long. WipEout 3. Yeah, this is another one of those cases where, like, so I gave this my highest rating, and, like, after spending so much time with 2097, I think I realized that I probably prefers 2097's gameplay, but WipEout 3 is so damn beautiful. It's so perfect to me. Like, the soundtrack was all composed by Sasha, and he has this amazing song called, like, Expander in it, and it's, like, one of my favorite probably my favorite dance track ever, and there are other artists involved as well, but, like, the soundtrack's incredible. Graphically, it's, like, it's the PlayStation, I don't think, could have done more than this. Like, it looks incredible. If you're able to play it in an emulator, upscaled in some way, it looks even better. Obviously, we love the game because our podcast art now is the main menu screen, the title screen of Wipeout 3. So I mean, for me, this is like the apex of the series. This is the one that, I mean, I think I briefly played it in '99. I rented it or something like that when I was a little kid, but like I didn't get it, so I barely touched it. So my introduction to Wipeout would come with Pure on the PSP, but once I rediscovered this game years and years later, I couldn't believe it. Yeah, it's just like, it's like emotional, the same way that Ridge Racer Type 4 is, at least for me.
And why is that? Like, if you could...
Well, it's just like the perfect confluence of so many things, musically, artistically. I love the logos, the team logos, and the advertisements, like, are so amazing. Like, I love that the Piranha logo is just like a rectangle. It's just, and just like Pfizer is fair. Like, I just love all of the aesthetics. I mean, again, it's a very time extend type thing, because like it's as much as we're a racing game podcast, we talk about all the other stuff ancillary to it that we love that's as important to us, and that might not be true for a lot of people, but like for me anyway, just like seeing like it's honestly difficult for me to decide what team I like the most in this game, because I always, up until this point, up until I played Wipeout 3, I always liked and preferred Pfizer. But then there's just something great about like Arcom's design, and Piranha's awesome, and yeah, I just all the teams are so perfect. It's like I can't pick, you know?
Pfizer for life, mate. It's the way it's got to be. Tough time.
Even I mean, AG Systems too. Like, I mean, they're a Japanese team, so I mean that's pretty cool. It's like I love that all the teams like have their different, you know, they're from different places, and all obviously very, very obvious to everyone. But I eat it up, man. Like this, if Wipeout 3 was like define the design of the series for the rest of time, and it never deviated from it, I would have been totally okay with that, because this is just perfect. The track design, just everything. I can't imagine anything better, which is why Fusion, at least for me, was like so offensive, but we already talked about Fusion.
Yeah. One of the kind of the coolest things about the teams and what you're saying about they come from a certain location and it's fairly obvious is like, once again, it's like a meta commentary on the overall arcing theme of the series that corporations will eventually try and control everything. So like, it isn't good enough for Europe to have a team called Team Europe or whatever. It has to be related to a brand.
Yeah.
And even the players of the game, we eat that shit up. Like, if they were just Team Japan, Team Europe, it wouldn't be the same.
Oh, who cares? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. The game knows exactly what it's doing, and it's just so iconic. Like, you can look at any of the designs in this game. It's made for a video game. It does feel as if it was made by professional designers, which of course it was. To 11 in this game throughout the whole thing. Like, 2097 does a great job on atmosphere with a nice, like, kind of splattering of the brands and logos, but in Wipeout 3 it feels like they go full in, like every single logo within this game, and they treat it with that amount of respect, and I think that's why the overall atmosphere from the game feels very corporate, but in a very good way.
Yeah, Daryl, do you have a favorite team? Brendan's very much in the Pfizer camp, so, and I'm undecided.
I mean, to be honest, with Wipeout 3, I mean, I have like a special place for the I might pronounce this wrong again, but the Gothic 45 series.
Yeah.
3. Yeah, they're pretty good, because that's how I discovered Wipeout 3 through a demo in PlayStation Magazine, number 50 to be precise. And yeah, it was just the first track. It was this shit, and I just kept playing it over and over and over and over and over again, and it was fantastic. And every time I played Wipeout 3, as I have been like this weekend, I mean, it's been that shit and Pfizer that I've been mainly playing as, and yeah, it's mainly those two.
Goteki 45, I never really liked that team, but I think the Goteki 45 ship in Wipeout 3 is maybe my favorite ship. I mean, it's just so like, it's so like rectangular and like so many hard edges compared to the other ships, and it's massive, and the colors are great. And oh my god, can we talk about, so the first track is great because it reminds me of of Out of Blue from Ridge Racer Type 4, which is again why these games like are associated. There's like the docks and everything and the ports and there are all these shipping containers and stuff. I think the Sunset shipping container aesthetic must have been like a big one in the late 90s, like just like introspective, like racing by the pier or something, I guess. I don't know. This is like a headcanon that I've developed for myself, but it's so iconic.
Definitely a trend.
Definitely a trend. Sure. A trend that should have been revisited. And oh my god, the box art for this game I think actually is my favorite WipEout box art ever. It's just like beautiful. All these rectangles and parallelograms and shit just like flying at you, and then you can see the Pfizer ship in it. This was another case where I guess they didn't trust the Americans because to understand anything, because they made the logo WipEout 3 in the US, and everywhere else it was the 3 taking the E in WipEout. But that to me is like, that's obvious. Like, I'm amazed that they had such little faith in us that they couldn't do that. I mean, it's a 3 E backwards. It's so simple.
Yeah, especially when it had been like type formed at that point where the E was capitalized as well. So like it stands out. It was surely anybody would get it, but I think by putting the 3 at the end of the title, it kind of devalues how it's in its original form.
Yeah, I was thinking about ways in which WipEout 3 is different to play than 2097. It has that boost feature, which is also your ship's stamina or health, I guess, which is kind of weird because that never happened again, right? Because you would be able to use your energy as your boost, which is, I mean, when I think of that, that's F-Zero type stuff. Like, you could always see that in F-Zero, and I'm used to it in F-Zero, but I didn't think it really made sense in WipEout, so that's like the one thing that never really caught on with me. It's kind of like this weird anomaly.
Especially because the whole mantra for WipEout 3 is to create a believable future, as the team said, but this feels like because this is a game, rather than if this was a real sport or motorsport, teams would actually implement a system like this that could hinder the kind of the health of the ship. And it's a small gameplay thing, there's no point in getting too annoyed by it, but I do agree that it almost felt it felt like at ends compared to what else the game was trying to achieve on the design front and the gameplay front.
Yeah. Should also add that with 2097 in this game, you could rip the soundtracks in just a regular CD, CD writer or reader or whatever on your PC. So I was doing that years ago, and that's how I got all the soundtracks that I had, which is great. I mean, it's funny because I think they release like separate soundtracks on top of them, but it's like, who would buy them when if you just buy the PlayStation game, you can get all the music.
I mean, now looking back, I'd love to have the soundtrack CD.
Yeah, I mean, now I would, but at the time it was just like, oh, I mean, it's all on the disc, right? Interestingly, I've owned 2 copies of WipEout 3, and both of them have this weird issue where they skip songs, like, in the middle of songs, or they won't, like I'll be racing and they'll just keep restarting the same song over and over again and won't move on to another one or finish the song. And I have to think that because I ran into this issue 2 times, that it might just be... It's either a problem with the way I'm playing the game, because it might be a thing on PS3. Is that it?
Could be. Yeah, that's actually a good theory, to be honest, because I don't know if the emulation is 1-to-1 on the PlayStation 3.
I mean, it should be. I think if we had Andrew on the show, he'd be able to answer. But I think on the PS3, it does, like, the PS3 has, like, basically PS1 chip inside of it or something like that, and doesn't even like emulate the PS1. Like, it actually runs those games like almost natively. But still, it might be some weird quirk, or it might just be there was some horrible like pressing issue with WipEout 3 discs in the US, and that's why the NTSC ones, and that's why it doesn't work. I don't know, but it was always annoying because it is my favorite soundtrack.
Yeah, I bet that would be really frustrating.
Real quick, do either of you have like a favorite song from these games?
Oh, in terms of like 2097 and 3, or
one, either both or one. I don't know. Any favorite songs at all?
Right, Paul Van Dyke's up there for me. It's an absolutely brilliant song, and so is Expander.
Yeah, Expander's great. The Paul Van Dyke song, that's 3? I'm trying to pick up
that's
the
3.
soundtracks, yeah. Oh, it's Avenue, right?
Yeah, that's the one.
Yeah, really, really good.
On Body Emotion, I think it is. That's a really good one. That's on 2097.
Yeah, Body Emotion's great. That's Cold Storage, I think. Yeah, I love Expander, Petrol, which it actually might have been Wipeout 1, but that's a great song. Orbital Petrol.
Firestarter instrumental, of course.
What was that?
Firestarter instrumental, of course.
Firestarter. I mean, I love the vocals in that song, so the instrumental actually takes something away from me.
Right. Yeah, I can see that, to be honest.
No.
I like.
I gotta hear Keith howling through the whole song. It's just not the same without it.
Yeah, exactly. No, that's true.
Yeah, the Tin There, which it's like Pearl's Girl Tin There or something like that is how I found on Spotify. But it's a different song. Yeah, amazing. We Have Explosive. So many great songs. Oh my god. These soundtracks are legendary for sure.
You put together, like you're saying, you're already doing it by the sounds of it, Adam, but a master playlist on Spotify and share it on the Twitter feed.
Yeah, so
all the tracks.
Yeah, I've been doing that. There are a lot of people who have put together Wipeout soundtracks, but they're not all they don't include everything from every game. They leave out some certain, and I just think it's because they're hard to find. For example, Tin There is it's like a B-side of Pearl's Girl and sort of like Pearl's Girl, but actually a different song completely. So if you don't know what you're looking for, some of these songs are listed on Spotify under different names and whatnot, which is why I always for video game music and stuff like that, I like just having the local MP3s like a dinosaur, because then it's I know, I actually have everything and I don't have to search for it online. But yeah, we could put together a playlist. I mean, I made one. It's also got a lot of stuff that's not Wipeout in it, but very Wipeout inspired.
Yeah.
But yeah. Yeah, these two fantastic games. I think I'm gonna finish my 2097 playthrough and then go through Wipeout 3, because I was having a lot of fun with 2097 the other day.
Yeah, I think I might give 2097 a go as well. I mean, I've kind of took a different approach since we started doing this series, in the sense that I've been playing a lot of the Wipeout likes that have appeared recently, such as Ballistic NG, Formula Fusion, Redout, those types of games, just to see what are they missing right now? What can they do to kind of emulate that style if that's what they want? More so for Formula Fusion, because that's literally the ex-Wipeout devs, and they've got the Designers Republic involved. So when they release what will be known as Pacer later on this year, because Formula Fusion has been officially discontinued, to see how close they're at the moment. So I've been playing a lot of Formula Fusion to see what's missing from that Wipeout feel, and they're pretty close at the moment. So I have a feeling Pacer, when it does come out, whenever it comes out, because I imagine it'll have another few delays, just think we get to new Wipeout with some old Wipeout inspired stuff in there design wise, lines, but there's just something mythical about Wipeout, I think, that you can only get by going back and playing 2097, free Fusion if you really hate yourself.
Don't disparage one of Daryl's favorite Wipeouts that way.
I'm sorry, Daryl.
How dare you?
Yeah. It'd be good to. I haven't played through many of those games either. I don't know if you, Daryl, if you've experienced any of them. I mean, Pacer looks really good for sure.
To be honest, I mean, I've been playing a lot of these Wipeout games the past couple of weeks ever since we recorded, and I'm just tempted now just to buy a PlayStation Vita and just try and get all these Wipeout games on it now. To play 2097 on a OLED display on a Vita, it's really sounding tempting to me now. I want to get into it.
Yeah, I can say for a fact that, we might all own Ridge Racer Type 4 on the Vita, but that game looks so good on that screen. And the Vita screen is just low resolution enough to the point where it doesn't upscale badly when you're playing PlayStation 1 games on that display. It sucks because it is a small window because it's 4:3, but I mean it still look amazing. I would like to do that too. I have a Vita, but I've never really hacked it or tried to do anything to it, but I should give it a shot.
I think there's a way of just getting Wipeout 1, 2097, Pure, Pulse, and another Wipeout game I've forgotten about. But definitely you can have those games on, absolutely.
Yeah, well, the funny thing is, I know there are different, in terms of how I play these games now, I know that there are different PlayStation 1 classics in like different regions. In the US, I think we only ever got Wipeout 1 and Pulse as games that you could play on. I mean, Pulse obviously came out on the PSP, so you could play that on the Vita, but like, never Pure, unfortunately, I don't think. Never 2097 or XL, which is really unfortunate, because like, I don't know anybody who prefers the original Wipeout to Wipeout XL. Like, XL's like the best of that era, so, but I guess there might be an issue with the soundtracks that probably has something to do with it.
Yeah, maybe, yeah. It's just very tempting, isn't it, just to play, like, say, Wipeout 3 or 2097 just on the Vita, because we know it's not going to be ported to the Switch. I mean, you know, it's pretty much a fact, to be honest. So I think to have that as something like extra to carry around with you and for a commute, I think it's really tempting. So, yeah, definitely something I'm looking into now. Yeah,
I think I have a project to work on this week. Try and get those games up and running.
Absolutely.
Alrighty. Yeah, I think that just about covers it, unless anyone else has got anything to say. This episode went a little bit longer than I expected, but I mean, I feel like once we got to like 2097 and 3, it's just like you can't stop talking about those games. They're so special.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm just going to be playing after this, though.
Definitely. Well, all right, everyone, thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you again with another new episode shortly. Take care.
Thanks, guys.
Take care.